Maya Collins walked through the metal doors of Combat Training Room 7 with her bag slung over one shoulder and her eyes focused straight ahead. The room buzzed with voices speaking in dozens of different languages from across the galaxy. Some sounds were clicks and whistles that her translator could barely handle, while others were deep rumbles that made the floor shake under her boots. She found an empty seat in the back row and sat down without saying a word to anyone. The Galactic Military Academy on Nexus Prime was the most famous training center in known space. Every species that belonged to the Defense Coalition sent their best young fighters here to learn from each other. Maya was one of only 12 humans in the entire academy. Most other species had been part of the coalition for hundreds of years, while humans had only joined 3 years ago after proving themselves in some border conflicts that everyone else thought were too small to matter. At the front of the room stood Commander Zethkar. His green scales caught the light as he moved, and his yellow eyes could spot a student not paying attention from across the room. He was a Saurian from the desert worlds near the galactic core and had fought in more battles than most students could count. The scars on his neck and arms told stories of wars that happened before Maya was even born. "Welcome to Advanced Combat Theory and Application," he said in his deep voice that carried easily through the room. "This semester you will learn why some fighters live through wars while others become statistics in military reports." Maya pulled out a simple notebook and pen, while most other students activated holographic displays or neural interfaces that projected information directly into their minds. She started writing down everything the commander said, while around her the other students whispered comments about how primitive human technology looked. "In this class you will face opponents that will test every skill you think you have, Commander," Zethkar continued. "The combat simulator can create any enemy from any world we have data on and some we hope we never meet in real life. Your final grade depends on how far you advance in our tournament system." A student near the front raised what looked like an arm but might have been a tentacle. Maya recognized him as Crix-9 from the insectoid Chitauri worlds. He was almost 7 feet tall with 6 limbs that could move faster than most eyes could follow. His species had been warriors for thousands of years, and they never let anyone forget it. "Commander," he said in the clicking language that came out of his mouthparts, "will the difficulty levels account for the natural advantages some species have over others? Every opponent you face will be scaled to challenge you personally," the commander replied. "A Chitauri warrior faces different enemies than a Saurian soldier or a human fighter." Several students turned to look at Maya when he mentioned humans. She could feel their eyes on her, but kept writing in her notebook like she had not noticed anything. The truth was, she noticed everything. She heard the small laugh from the blue-skinned Altarian girl 3 seats over. She saw the way the energy being called Veltarn flickered slightly when humans were mentioned, like he found the whole idea amusing. She noticed that her fellow human Jake Morrison was getting red in the face, like he wanted to say something back to all of them. "The tournament will begin in 2 weeks, Commander Zethkar announced. Preliminary rounds will eliminate half of you. Quarterfinals will eliminate half of what remains. Only 4 students will make it to the semifinals, and only one will be declared champion of this class." Jake Morrison could not stay quiet any longer. He stood up and said, "Just so everyone knows, not all humans are the same. Some of us have been training for combat since we could walk." A few alien students made sounds that might have been laughter. Crix-9 turned his compound eyes toward Jake and said, "Your species has been fighting wars for what, a few thousand years? The Chitauri have been perfecting combat for 50,000 years. There is no comparison. We will see about that," Jake shot back. Maya kept writing in her notebook. She wrote down that Crix-9 relied on speed and intimidation. She wrote down that Veltarn seemed to think physical combat was beneath him, which meant he probably had never been seriously challenged. She wrote down that the Altarian girl kept touching a crystal on her belt, which suggested she needed it for her fighting abilities. Commander Zethkar raised his hand for silence. "You will see about many things once the tournament begins. For now, let me explain how the combat simulator works." He pressed a control, and the center of the room transformed into a small arena surrounded by a shimmering energy field. "This system can create any environment and any opponent. It reads your biological data and creates challenges that push you to your absolute limits. Some of you will face enemies that match your strengths, while others will face enemies designed to exploit your weaknesses. Maya looked around the room again. Most students were leaning forward with excitement or confidence. Crix9 was flexing his limbs like he was already imagining his victories. Veltarn was floating slightly above his seat in what was probably meant to show how little effort anything required from him. The Altarian girl was whispering to her friends about betting pools that were probably already starting. Your first assignment, the commander said, is to study the combat records available in the Academy database. Learn how different species fight. Learn their strengths and their weaknesses. The smart student learns from watching others succeed and fail after class ended. Maya packed her simple notebook while around her other students gathered in groups to discuss strategy and form alliances. Jake Morrison walked over to her seat. You could have backed me up in there, he said. We humans need to stick together. Maya looked up at him. Talking about what we can do is not the same as doing it. So what are you going to do? Maya stood up and slung her bag over her shoulder. I'm going to the library to study those combat records. Jake shook his head as she walked away. Other students were still talking loudly about their plans and expectations. Maya heard Crix9 telling anyone who would listen that he had never lost a combat simulation. She heard Veltarn explaining to a group that physical fighting was just a crude approximation of true warfare. Maya walked through the academy halls toward the library. She had a lot of work to do and only 2 weeks to do it. While other students planned their victories, she would learn how they could be defeated. Maya spent the next week in the academy library while other students trained in the practice rooms or socialized in the common areas. The database contained combat records from every major battle fought by coalition forces in the past century. She read about Chitauri swarm tactics and how they used their speed to overwhelm enemies. She studied Saurian defensive techniques and their ability to fight for hours without tiring. She learned about Altarian crystal magic and how they channeled energy through focusing stones. Most importantly, she read about how each species had been defeated in past conflicts. Every fighting style had weaknesses that their practitioners either did not know about or refused to acknowledge. The Chitauri were deadly in close combat but struggled against opponents who could predict their movement patterns. Saurians were nearly unstoppable in direct combat but had trouble adapting when their plans fell apart. Altarians were powerful magic users but depended completely on their crystals for any real strength. On the first day of individual assessments, Maya sat in the back of the training room and watched as her classmates took their turns against level 5 combat drones. These were standard opponents designed to test basic fighting skills without being too dangerous for students who were still learning. Crix9 went first and put on a show that had other students cheering. His 6 limbs moved in patterns too fast for most eyes to follow as he tore the drone apart in under 30 seconds. He stood over the wreckage and clicked his mandibles in what Maya had learned was the Chitauri equivalent of a victory roar. Impressive, said Commander Zethkar, making notes on his display. Time to completion 28 seconds. Style points noted for technical excellence. Veltarn went next and demonstrated why his species considered themselves above physical combat. He simply phased through every attack the drone made while striking back with energy bolts that came from nowhere. The drone never even got close to hitting him before it collapsed in a shower of sparks. 35 seconds, the commander announced. Efficient use of species abilities, the Altarian girl whose name was Lenara stepped into the arena with her crystal belt glowing bright blue. She gestured once and the combat drone froze in place like it had been turned to stone. Then she gestured again and it exploded into pieces that rained down around her feet. 41 seconds, Commander Zethkar said. Good control of external energy sources. Jake Morrison tried to make up for human reputation by going into the arena swinging his fists and shouting battle cries. He managed to destroy the drone, but only after taking several hits that left him bloody and breathing hard. His time was over 2 minutes and he limped out of the arena looking embarrassed. 2 minutes and 18 seconds. the commander announced without any comment about style or technique. Other students whispered among themselves about human fighting methods. Maya heard words like primitive and crude and desperate. A few made jokes about humans trying to punch their way through space battles. When her name was called, Maya walked into the arena carrying nothing but a simple combat knife. The drone activated and immediately began scanning her for weaknesses. It was designed to adapt its tactics based on what species it was fighting, and Maya could see its sensors trying to figure out the best way to challenge a human opponent. The drone settled on a straightforward approach and came at her with mechanical precision. Maya moved to meet it without any wasted motion. She stepped left to avoid its first attack, then right to dodge the second. On the third attack, she moved forward instead of away, and drove her knife into the exact center of its processing unit. The drone shut down instantly. Maya pulled her knife free and walked out of the arena without looking back at the wreckage. 3 minutes and 42 seconds, Commander Zethkar announced. His voice gave no hint of what he thought about her performance. Maya sat back down in her usual seat while other students continued their whispered conversations. She heard Crix 9 say something about humans being adequate for basic tasks. Veltarn made a comment about how physical fighting was all her species really understood. Linara told her friends that Maya's technique was workmanlike but not very creative. Jake Morrison caught up with Maya after class ended. "That was good," he said, trying to sound encouraging. "I mean, it was not flashy like the others, but you got the job done." Maya was putting her knife back in its sheath. "Getting the job done is the point. Yeah, but you could have made it look more impressive. These instructors like to see some style with the substance." Maya looked at him. "Did you watch what the others did wrong?" Jake frowned. "Wrong, they all won faster than both of us. Crix 9 used 4 limbs when 2 would have been enough. Veltarn stayed incorporeal longer than necessary, which wastes energy. Linara used her most powerful crystal for an opponent that could have been handled with much less. So what does it matter if they won?" Maya shouldered her bag. "It matters when they face opponents that force them to fight longer than 30 seconds. That evening, Maya returned to the library while other students celebrated their successful assessments in the recreation areas. She pulled up detailed analysis of each fight and studied the footage frame by frame. The Academy computer systems recorded everything in slow motion and from multiple angles, which let her see details that were invisible during real-time viewing. Crix 9's attack patterns followed classical Chitauri doctrine, which meant they were predictable if you knew what to look for. Veltarn's phasing ability had a rhythm to it that suggested he could not stay incorporeal indefinitely. Linara's crystal magic was impressive, but Maya noticed she always touched the same crystal in the same sequence, which suggested a dependency on specific stones for specific effects. Maya's roommate Amy Foster found her in the library after midnight. Amy was also human, but she was studying engineering instead of combat. "You missed dinner again," she said, sitting down across from Maya's table. "I was busy," Maya replied without looking up from her research. "Busy studying how to fight aliens. Busy learning how they think about fighting." Amy looked at the screens showing combat footage from dozens of different battles. "Do you really think you can beat them, Maya? These species have been fighting wars since before humans invented agriculture." Maya finally looked up from her work. "They have been fighting the same wars the same ways for thousands of years. When something works, they keep doing it forever. When something does not work, they blame bad luck or poor execution, instead of changing their approach, and humans are different. Humans change," Maya said simply. "When something does not work, we try something else. When we find something that works better, we use that instead." Amy was quiet for a moment. "The other students are making bets about the tournament. Jake Morrison has better odds than you do." Maya turned back to her research. "Let them bet. Does it bother you that they think you cannot win?" Maya was already focused on a recording of Veltarn's previous tournament fights. "It bothers me that they think they understand what winning means." The next few days followed the same pattern. Students took turns against increasingly difficult opponents while Maya watched and took notes. Crix9 continued to impress everyone with his speed and aggression. Veltarn made every fight look effortless with his energy attacks and phasing abilities. Linara demonstrated new crystal techniques that had other magic users asking for lessons. Maya continued to win her matches efficiently, but without any of the style that seemed to impress the instructors. Her times got slightly better, but she never made her victories look easy the way the top students did. Other students started calling her performance adequate, which was not really an insult but was not a compliment either. Commander Zethkar announced the tournament brackets on Friday afternoon. Maya was placed in the preliminary section with other students who were considered good but not great. Crix9 and Veltarn were given spots in higher brackets that would let them skip the early elimination rounds. After the announcement, Jake Morrison came over to Maya's seat looking frustrated. "They put you in the kids section," he said. "That is not fair." Maya was copying the tournament schedule into her notebook. "The bracket does not matter." "Of course it matters. Everyone thinks you are not good enough for the real competition." Maya finished writing and looked up at him. "Good, that night, the first betting pools opened in the student recreation areas. Maya heard from Amy that she had been given odds of 20-1 against winning the whole tournament. Crix9 was the heavy favorite, followed by Veltarn and Linara. Even Jake Morrison had better odds than Maya despite his poor performance. In the assessments, Maya did not place any bets. She had more studying to do. Tournament day arrived with more excitement than Maya had seen since arriving at the academy. Students from every department came to watch the combat class compete, and representatives from major coalition worlds filled the observation decks. The main arena had been expanded to accommodate larger audiences, and multiple camera drones buzzed overhead to record everything for broadcast across the galaxy. Maya arrived early and found a quiet corner where she could observe the other competitors without being noticed. Most of them were doing warm-up exercises or practicing their signature techniques. Crix9 was going through a complex routine that involved all 6 of his limbs moving in different patterns simultaneously. Veltarn was floating in meditation pose while energy crackled around his form. Linara had laid out her entire collection of crystals and was testing each one to make sure they were properly charged. Jake Morrison spotted Maya and came over looking nervous. "Are you ready for this?" he asked while bouncing on his feet like he had too much energy to stand still. "I am ready," Maya replied. "I mean really ready, because these preliminary fights are not going to be like the practice sessions. They are going to throw real challenges at us." Maya had spent the previous night reviewing footage of every tournament held at the academy for the past 5 years. She knew exactly what kinds of opponents the preliminary rounds would include. The preliminary opponents will be selected from the standard combat database. Most likely candidates are Theran shock troopers, Kandari infiltrators, or Voltaic energy soldiers. Jake stared at her. "How do you know that?" "I read the tournament rules and cross-referenced them with previous years. But those are all enemies that coalition forces have actually fought against." "They are not training drones," Maya nodded. "The tournament is designed to test combat skills against real threats, not artificial ones." The first match was called, and a Saurian student named Gareth stepped into the arena. The combat simulator created a Theran shock trooper, which was an 8-foot-tall, armored warrior carrying weapons that could punch through steel. Gareth used classic Saurian tactics and simply absorbed the enemy's attacks while wearing it down with steady counterstrikes. The fight lasted almost 10 minutes, but Gareth won decisively. "Excellent defensive technique," announced the tournament commentator, whose voice carried throughout the arena. "Gareth demonstrates why Saurian warriors are considered among the most durable fighters in the galaxy." The crowd cheered, and Gareth raised his arms in acknowledgement before leaving the arena. Maya made notes about his fighting style and the specific techniques he had used against an opponent designed to break through heavy defenses. Linara fought next against a Kandari infiltrator that could become invisible and strike from unexpected angles. She countered by using her crystals to create a field of light that revealed the enemy no matter where it tried to hide. Her victory was impressive and took less than 3 minutes. "Brilliant tactical thinking," the commentator said. "Linara shows why Altarian crystal magic remains one of the most versatile combat disciplines." More cheers from the crowd, and Lenara bowed gracefully before walking out with her crystals glowing in satisfaction. Crix 9's preliminary fight was over almost before it began. His opponent was a voltaic energy soldier that attacked with lightning-fast energy blasts, but Crix 9 was simply too fast for it to target effectively. He destroyed it in under 40 seconds while barely seeming to try. Devastating speed and precision, the commentator announced. Crix 9 continues to demonstrate why the Chitauri are considered the finest close combat specialists in known space. The crowd's reaction was the loudest yet, and Crix 9 performed a victory display that involved all 6 limbs moving in complex patterns. Other Chitauri in the audience clicked their mandibles in approval. Jake Morrison's turn came, and Maya watched him face off against another Theran shock trooper. He fought with determination and human stubbornness, but took several serious hits before finally bringing down his opponent. His victory took over 8 minutes, and he was bleeding when he left the arena. Human tenacity on display, the commentator said in a voice that suggested this was not necessarily a compliment. Jake Morrison shows that sometimes refusing to quit is enough to win. Maya's name was called, and she walked into the arena carrying only her combat knife. The crowd grew quieter as many spectators were not familiar with human fighting techniques. The combat simulator analyzed her species data and created a Kandari infiltrator similar to what Lenara had faced. The enemy immediately vanished from sight, and Maya stood perfectly still in the center of the arena. Spectators began murmuring that she looked confused or frightened. The Kandari infiltrator moved in a wide circle around her, looking for the best angle of attack. Maya closed her eyes and listened. The infiltrator's cloaking technology could fool visual sensors, but it could not eliminate the small sounds of movement or the tiny air currents created by a body in motion. She tracked its position as it completed one full circle, then began moving inward for the kill. When the attack came, Maya was already moving. She stepped left and drove her knife forward into empty air that suddenly was not empty anymore. The Kandari infiltrator materialized around her blade with a look of surprise on its face before collapsing to the arena floor. Total fight time was 1 minute and 57 seconds. Maya pulled her knife free and walked out of the arena without acknowledging the confused murmur from the crowd. The commentator was silent for several seconds before saying, "Efficient technique from Maya Collins, who demonstrates that sometimes the simplest approach is the most effective." The applause was polite but not enthusiastic. Maya had won, but she had not given the crowd the kind of spectacular show they expected from tournament fights. Valtarn's preliminary match was the most impressive of the day. His opponent was a massive Theran shock trooper equipped with heavy weapons and armor, but Veltarn simply phased through every attack while striking back with energy bolts that seemed to come from all directions at once. He never appeared to be in any danger, and his victory took exactly 90 seconds. "Flawless execution," the commentator said with genuine admiration. Veltarn shows why energy beings are considered to operate on a completely different level from physical fighters. The crowd gave him a standing ovation, and Veltarn acknowledged their appreciation with a graceful bow before floating out of the arena. Quarterfinal matches were scheduled for the following day, and Maya spent the evening studying footage of her potential opponents. She had advanced, but so had all the fighters everyone expected to advance. The real tournament was just beginning. Amy Foster found her in the library again, working late into the night. "I watched your fight today," she said. "That was incredible, Maya. You made it look so easy." Maya was reviewing tactical data on voltaic energy soldiers. "It was not easy. The infiltrator made 3 mistakes that I was able to exploit." "What kind of mistakes?" "It moved in a predictable pattern while cloaked. It attacked from the most obvious angle. It assumed I could not detect it without visual confirmation." Amy looked at the screens showing combat analysis from dozens of different battles. "Are you going to win this thing?" Maya finally looked up from her work. "I'm going to do what I came here to do," which is what exactly. Maya turned back to her research. "Learn how they think and then show them how we think." The quarterfinal brackets were announced that night, and Maya found herself matched against a Draknari warrior named Thorn who specialized in weapons combat. He was known for using multiple blades simultaneously and had never lost a tournament fight at the academy. Students who had seen both fighters were already discussing the matchup in the recreation areas. The general consensus was that Thorn's experience and weapon skills would be too much for Maya's simple approach to overcome. Maya read Thorn's combat record and found that he had won 47 consecutive matches over the past 2 years. He was fast with his blades and used a fighting style that kept opponents at a distance where they could not effectively counterattack, but Maya also noticed something else in his record. Thorn had never faced an opponent who was willing to take damage in order to get close enough to strike back. Every fighter he had defeated had tried to avoid his blades instead of accepting cuts in order to land their own attacks. Maya made notes about spacing and timing and acceptable levels of risk. Then she went to the Academy Medical Center to review human pain tolerance compared to other species. The research was enlightening. Quarterfinal day brought even larger crowds as word spread about the tournament's surprising developments. Maya had advanced further than anyone expected, and her upcoming match against Thorn was drawing attention from combat instructors and military observers who wanted to see how human fighting techniques would fare against established weapon masters. Maya arrived at the arena early and found Thorn already there practicing with his collection of curved blades. He moved through complex forms that involved spinning and slashing patterns designed to create an impenetrable barrier of sharp metal around his body. Other students watched his warm-up routine with obvious admiration. "Impressive display, Jake," Morrison said as he sat down next to Maya in the waiting area. His own quarterfinal match was scheduled for later in the day. "I have never seen anyone move blades that fast." Maya was watching Thorn's footwork rather than his weapon technique. "Fast movements are not the same as efficient movements." "What do you mean?" "He uses twice as many cuts as necessary to defend his position. Every extra movement creates an opening." Jake looked back at Thorn, who was now practicing against multiple training drones simultaneously. "I do not see any openings, Maya. That guy looks like a meat grinder with legs." Maya stood up as her name was called for the match. "Every defense has gaps if you know where to look." The arena had been configured as a weapons combat zone with multiple platforms and obstacles that skilled fighters could use for tactical advantage. Thorn entered carrying 4 curved blades and immediately began moving in the flowing patterns that had made him famous throughout the academy. Maya walked in with her single combat knife and took a position in the center of the arena. The contrast was striking enough that several spectators laughed at what looked like a ridiculous mismatch. "This should be interesting," the commentator said. Thorn's 4-blade technique against Maya's minimalist approach. The match began and Thorn immediately went into his signature attack pattern. His blades created a whirlwind of steel as he advanced across the arena floor. Maya retreated slowly. While studying the rhythm of his movements, most fighters would have continued backing away while looking for an opening that might never come. Maya did something different. She stopped retreating and stepped directly into Thorn's attack pattern. The crowd gasped as she deliberately moved into the path of his blades. Thorn's first cut opened a line across her left shoulder, but Maya kept moving forward. His second blade caught her across the ribs, drawing blood that stained her combat uniform, but Maya's knife found its target. She drove the blade between Thorn's ribs with surgical precision, while his own weapons were committed to cuts that had already missed their intended targets. Thorn staggered backward with Maya's knife protruding from his chest. His 4 blades clattered to the arena floor as he collapsed to his knees and then fell forward unconscious. Total fight time was 38 seconds. Maya pulled her knife free and walked out of the arena, while medics rushed in to treat both fighters. Her wounds were bleeding but not life-threatening, and she ignored them completely. The arena was completely silent for almost 10 seconds before confused murmuring began spreading through the crowd. No one had ever seen a fighter deliberately take serious wounds in order to land a single decisive strike. "Unprecedented tactics," the commentator finally said, in a voice that suggested he was not sure what he had just witnessed. Maya Collins demonstrates that sometimes the direct approach succeeds where complexity fails. Commander Zethkar was waiting for Maya as she left the medical station with her wounds treated and bandaged. "That was either brilliant or insane," he said without any expression on his scaled face. "It was necessary," Maya replied. "You took wounds that could have been avoided with better technique." Maya looked at him. "I took wounds that were acceptable in order to end the fight quickly. Thorn's defense was perfect against opponents who were trying not to get hurt, and you were not trying to avoid injury. I was trying to win." Commander Zethkar studied her for a long moment. "Most species consider taking unnecessary damage to be a sign of poor combat discipline. Most species have never had to fight for their survival against opponents with overwhelming advantages." The commander made some notes on his electronic pad. "We will discuss your tactical choices after the tournament is complete." Maya nodded and walked away to prepare for the semi-final round that would take place in 2 days. Word of her victory spread quickly through the academy, and Maya found herself the subject of intense discussion among students and faculty. Some called her tactics reckless, while others described them as innovative. A few suggested that humans might have fundamentally different approaches to combat than other species. Maya spent the next day studying footage of her semi-final opponent. Veltarn had won his quarter-final match against Linara in a spectacular display that had the crowd cheering for 5 minutes. The energy being had simply overwhelmed the Altarian's crystal magic with raw power that made her defensive. Techniques looked primitive by comparison. Veltarn was scheduled to fight Maya next, and most observers considered this to be the real final match, since everyone expected him to defeat Crix9 easily if he advanced. Betting odds had shifted dramatically, with Veltarn now heavily favored to win the entire tournament. Maya read every report she could find about energy being physiology and combat techniques. Veltarn's species could phase between corporeal and incorporeal states at will, which made them nearly impossible to hit with physical attacks. They could also project energy bolts with enough power to destroy heavy armor. The key weakness she found was buried in a technical manual about energy being metabolism. Phasing between states required enormous amounts of energy, and most individuals could only maintain incorporeal form for limited periods before needing to rest. Maya also discovered something interesting about energy being psychology. Veltarn's species had evolved beyond physical conflict thousands of years ago and considered material combat to be beneath their intellectual capabilities. They approached fighting as an intellectual exercise rather than a life-or-death struggle. Amy Foster found Maya in the library on the night before the semi-final match. "The whole academy is talking about your fight with Thorn," she said. "Some of the instructors are saying you might have discovered a new combat doctrine." Maya was reading about energy projection techniques and countermeasures. "There is nothing new about accepting short-term damage to achieve long-term victory. Maybe not for humans, but apparently it is revolutionary for everyone else." Maya looked up from her research. "What do you mean?" Amy sat down across from her. "I talked to some of the alien students today, and they all said the same thing. In their cultures, taking unnecessary wounds is considered either stupid or cowardly because it suggests you are not skilled enough to win without getting hurt. And what do humans consider it? Practical," Amy said with a small smile. "We take whatever damage we have to take in order to get the job done." Maya nodded and returned to her reading. She had learned something important about how other species thought about combat, and it was going to be useful in tomorrow's match. The semi-final was scheduled for late afternoon to accommodate live broadcasts to multiple star systems. Maya spent the morning in meditation and equipment preparation. Her knife had been sharpened to a perfect edge, and her combat uniform had been repaired from the previous day's damage. When she arrived at the arena, she found crowds larger than any she had seen during her time at the academy. Word had spread beyond the school, and military observers from several coalition worlds were present to watch what many were calling the most interesting tournament development in years. Veltarn arrived with great ceremony, floating several feet above the arena floor while energy crackled around his translucent form. He acknowledged the crowd's cheers with graceful gestures that sent waves of light cascading through the air. Maya walked into the arena on foot, carrying her simple knife and wearing her standard combat gear. The contrast between the two fighters was so dramatic that it drew comments from commentators who were broadcasting the match across multiple star systems. "This promises to be fascinating," the lead commentator said. "Veltarn's sophisticated energy manipulation against Maya's straightforward physical approach." Maya took her position in the center of the arena and closed her eyes. Around her, the crowd grew quiet in anticipation of what many expected to be the defining match of the tournament. The signal came, and Veltarn immediately phased incorporeal while launching energy attacks from multiple directions. Maya stood perfectly still as the bolts passed harmlessly through the space where she had been standing moments before, but Maya was not where she appeared to be. She had begun moving the instant the match started and was now tracking Veltarn's incorporeal form through small changes in air temperature and electromagnetic fluctuations that her research had taught her to recognize. Veltarn continued his attack pattern, confident that no physical fighter could threaten him while he remained incorporeal. But staying incorporeal required constant energy expenditure, and Maya simply waited while he exhausted himself trying to land hits on a target that was never quite where he expected it to be. After 90 seconds of sustained energy projection, Veltarn was forced to rematerialize to rest and recharge. News of Maya's victory over Veltarn spread across the galaxy faster than anyone expected. Military academies on dozens of worlds received reports about the human student who had defeated the tournament favorite using techniques no one had seen before. Combat instructors began requesting footage of her matches, and tactical analysts started writing papers about human fighting doctrine. Maya spent the day before the final match in complete isolation. She had moved beyond studying her opponent's techniques and was now focused on something deeper. Crix-9 was not just a skilled fighter, but a representative of everything the galactic military establishment believed about combat superiority. The Chitauri had been warriors for 50,000 years. Their entire civilization was built around the concept of martial excellence, and they had never been defeated in single combat by any other species. Crix-9 personally had won over 200 matches without ever being seriously challenged, but Maya had spent weeks studying not just how he fought, but why he fought that way. Chitauri combat doctrine was based on overwhelming opponents with speed and aggression that made counterattacks impossible. They had perfected this approach over millennia and considered it the ultimate expression of fighting skill. The problem was that their perfection had made them predictable. Crix-9 fought exactly like every other Chitauri warrior because their techniques had not needed to evolve for thousands of years. They were the apex predators in their corner of the galaxy, and apex predators did not change successful hunting strategies. Maya understood something that the Chitauri had forgotten after 50,000 years of dominance. Adaptation was more powerful than perfection. Final match day brought crowds that filled every seat in the Academy's main arena and overflow viewing areas throughout the station. Representatives from the Coalition High Command were present, along with military observers from species that were not even part of the Alliance. The match was being broadcast live to over 100 worlds. Maya arrived early and found the arena already buzzing with excitement. Crix-9 was in the center of the floor performing an elaborate pre-fight ritual that involved all 6 of his limbs moving in patterns that told the story of Chitauri military history. Other members of his species in the crowd clicked their mandibles in rhythm with his movements. Jake Morrison found Maya in the competitor waiting area. His own tournament had ended in the quarterfinals, but he had stayed to watch her matches. "Are you nervous?" he asked. Maya was sitting quietly with her eyes closed and her knife resting across her knees. "No, this is Crix-9 Maya. He has never lost a fight." "Never." Maya opened her eyes and looked at him. "Neither had Veltarn. That was different. Veltarn was overconfident and made mistakes. Crix-9 does not make mistakes." Maya stood up and checked her equipment one final time. "Everyone makes mistakes, Jake. The question is whether their opponent can recognize them and exploit them fast enough." Commander Zethkar appeared in the doorway to the waiting area. "Maya Collins, you are wanted for final preparation." Maya followed him toward the arena entrance while Jake called out, "Good luck," behind her. "You do not need luck today," the commander said as they walked You need to fight the way humans fight instead of trying to impress people who do not understand your methods. Maya looked at him. You have been watching my matches. I have been studying them. Your species approaches combat differently than any others in the coalition. How so? Commander Zethkar stopped walking and turned to face her. Every other species fights to demonstrate their superiority. Humans fight to eliminate threats. The difference is more significant than anyone realized. They reached the arena entrance where Maya could hear the crowd cheering as introductions began. The galaxy is about to learn something important about human capabilities, the commander said. Try not to kill him, Maya nodded and walked through the entrance into the arena. The noise was overwhelming as thousands of spectators from dozens of worlds cheered and shouted in languages Maya could not identify. The arena floor had been expanded to maximum size and configured with multiple elevation changes and obstacles to showcase the full range of combat techniques. Crix 9 was already in position at the center of the arena. His black carapace gleamed under the lights and his compound eyes tracked Maya's movement as she approached. He was nearly 7 feet tall and his 6 limbs were already moving in preparation patterns that created a blur of motion around his body. Maya walked to her position carrying only her combat knife. The size difference between the two fighters was dramatic enough that several commentators made remarks about the apparent mismatch. A final match of what has been an extraordinary tournament, the lead commentator announced to the galaxy-wide audience. Crix 9 representing 50,000 years of Chitauri martial tradition against Maya Collins, whose innovative human techniques have surprised everyone including herself. Maya took her position and closed her eyes for a moment. Around her the crowd grew quiet in anticipation. When she opened her eyes again, Crix 9 was staring at her with what might have been curiosity or contempt. The signal came, and Crix 9 immediately launched into his signature attack pattern. 6 limbs moved in coordinated strikes designed to hit multiple targets simultaneously while his body spun and twisted to avoid any possible counterattack. It was a display of speed and coordination that had overwhelmed every opponent he had ever faced. Maya did not try to avoid the attacks or match his speed. Instead, she moved directly into his pattern with the same deliberate acceptance of damage she had shown against Thorn. Crix 9's first strike caught her across the shoulder, opening a cut through her combat uniform. His second strike hit her ribs hard enough to crack bone, but Maya's knife found its target between the plates of his carapace. The blade slipped through the joint where his upper arm connected to his torso, and Crix 9's left arm went limp as nerve. Connections were severed. The Chitauri warrior staggered backward in shock. No opponent had ever gotten past his defenses to land a significant blow. Maya pressed her advantage and moved forward again, accepting another cut across her back to get close enough for a second strike. This time her knife found the nerve cluster that controlled his rear legs. Crix 9 collapsed to the arena floor as his lower body stopped responding to his commands. Total fight time was 1.7 seconds. Maya stood over the fallen Chitauri warrior without breathing hard despite her injuries. Blood was running down. Her arm and her ribs ached with every breath, but she had accomplished what she came to do. The arena was completely silent. Thousands of spectators from across the galaxy stared in disbelief at what they had just witnessed. The greatest Chitauri warrior of his generation had been defeated by a human student in less than 2 seconds. Commander Zethkar entered the arena and approached Maya while medics rushed to treat both fighters. Explain to them what they just saw, he said quietly. Maya looked up at the observation decks, where military officials and combat instructors were staring down at her with expressions of shock and confusion. She raised her voice so everyone in the arena could hear her. You all fight like you are trying to win, she said. Humans fight like we are trying to survive. The arena remained silent as her words were translated into dozens of languages and broadcast across the galaxy. Every move you make is designed to look impressive or demonstrate your superiority, Maya continued. Every move we make is designed to end the threat as quickly as possible. She walked over to where Crix 9 was receiving medical treatment. The Chitauri warrior was conscious but unable to move his damaged limbs. You have been fighting the same way for 50,000 years because it worked against everyone you faced, Maya said to him. But you never faced anyone who was willing to. Accept injuries in order to get close enough to strike back. Crix9 clicked his mandibles weakly. Your species fights without honor, Maya knelt down next to him. Our species fights to survive? Honor is something you worry about after the fighting is over. She stood up and addressed the crowd again. We study how you fight so we can learn your weaknesses. We adapt our techniques to exploit those weaknesses. We accept whatever damage we have to take in order to eliminate threats to our survival. Commander Zethkar stepped forward. Maya Collins is declared champion of this tournament and winner of the Academy Combat Prize. The applause was uncertain at first, but gradually built as the implications of what they had witnessed began to sink in. Maya had not just won a student tournament, but had demonstrated that human combat doctrine represented a fundamental shift in how warfare could be conducted. Over the following days, military academies across the galaxy began revising their tactical curricula to include human fighting methods. The Coalition High Command requested detailed reports on human capabilities and started integrating human officers into planning positions they had never been offered before. Maya received assignment offers from every major military branch in the galaxy. Combat units that had never accepted non-native species began requesting human officers. Research institutes wanted to study human tactical thinking and adaptation capabilities. Amy Foster found Maya in the library a week after the tournament reading tactical manuals from a dozen different worlds. So what are you going to do now? She asked. You could have any assignment you want.